Le Sorcier releases The Witch's Revenge in America and The Sorcerer's Revenge in the UK, is a French horror comedy trick film written, directed, and edited by Georges Méliès. Released in 1903, the film also stars Méliès as the sorcerer, with the rest of the cast going uncredited, as was typical for the time. At 3 minutes and 17 seconds, it's silent, and I would classify it as appropriate for all audiences. We know almost nothing about the production of this film, except that it was likely filmed at Méliès' home studio outside of Paris and was released by his production company, Star Film Company. Méliès would have also overseen, designed, and at least partially worked on the set, costumes, and special effects, which included things like substitution splices and dissolves. The plot here is quite simple. A sorcerer is brought before a king who seemingly wishes to execute him. Desperate to save himself, the sorcerer tries to earn the king's favor by entertaining him with magic tricks, including summoning a tableau vivant. Though the king is initially amused, the sorcerer's escalating antics ultimately offend him, until the man is sitting upon his throne. Enraged, the king calls for his detainment, only to discover that this time, his own guard has been infiltrated by the sorcerer's assistants. I've mentioned this in prior reviews, but over the course of a mere 27 years, Georges Méliès made over 500 films. Even though all of them were short films, that is a crazy output for a director, especially when one considers the fact he was also writing, producing, and editing those films, while making a huge portion of their sets, costumes, and props, doing their special effects, and often starring in them. That is an unfathomable amount of work, and even the most talented and creative people, I think, would struggle to consistently come up with new ideas and put out work that feels fresh every time. As such, it shouldn't really be surprising that as time went on, repetition and contrivances came to dog Méliès' work. When The Witch's Revenge came out, he still had a decade left to go for his career, but some cracks were already beginning to show. If you've seen some of Méliès' prior work, you've basically already seen this film, with only a few elements standing out at all, and we'll get to those. As with many of his horror comedies, this features a vaguely medieval aesthetic, a powerful figure being overthrown, and some excellent special effects. And while all of that can be really great in a unique or just fun movie, it's kind of old hat here. The story just isn't groundbreaking, nor is the way it's told, and the comedy is not nearly as funny as it was in Méliès' past efforts. There's also the fact that this film really reminds you that Méliès started out as a stage magician. There's a very minimal movement of the characters at points. It feels more like you're in the audience of a magic show than watching a movie, and that doesn't really work. See, there's an impressiveness to even the simplest magic show, and awe as you try to figure out how they did what they did right in front of you. That makes it so you don't crave a story or need much more than a guy standing on stage making gestures. But with a movie, we know how he did what he did. For example, he used a dissolve. As incredible as cinema can be, it's a different medium with different requirements. And even at this point in cinema history, people were beginning to want more. Audience attendance slowly petered out for Méliès as a result. Ultimately, this is the kind of film that leaves my mind shortly after I watch it, with only a few elements really standing out. The smooth dissolve of the tableau vivant, and the chair flipping sequence, in which the sorcerer transfigures a chair into a man. That part looks great. I actually watched it on a loop. But sadly, that is the most fun that the film gets. I am going to give The Witch's Revenge a 1.5 out of 5, with the special effects doing basically all of the heavy lifting. I really only recommend it if you're a Méliès completionist, or you're just really, really interested in early substitution splicing and dissolves. Le Monstre, released in English as The Monster, is a French horror comedy trick film written, directed, and edited by Georges Méliès. Released in 1903, it also stars Méliès as the priest, with the rest of the cast going uncredited. At 2 minutes and 24 seconds, it's silent, and I would classify it as appropriate for all audiences if it weren't for the mild racism. As with the film I've already discussed today, we know almost nothing about the production of this film, except that it was likely filmed at Méliès' home studio outside of Paris and was released by his production company, Star Film Company. Yet again, Méliès would have overseen, designed, and at least partially worked on the set, costumes, and special effects, the latter of which included things like substitution splices and puppetry. One piece of context regarding this film is that it came out during a wave of renewed Egyptomania. That is, a period of intense cultural fixation within Western countries on ancient Egypt. These periods, perhaps most notably incited after Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798, continued to wax and wane over the centuries, and were pretty much always tainted by colonialism and exotification. At the turn of the 20th century in Europe and America, the field of Egyptology was a popular one, and European and American expeditions into Egypt were very much underway. Westerners tend to view Egypt in a very inaccurate, simplistic, and downright mystical manner. Our engagement with its history and culture marked by invasions, mass grave robbing, and some pretty disgusting colonial practices, like eating mummies. That's a real thing that people, largely rich, did because they thought it had medicinal benefits. They stole Egyptian corpses, many of them of profound historical significance, ground them up, and ate them. The reality is, ancient Egypt cannot be reduced to pharaohs, mummies, and hieroglyphics. It was a cradle of civilization that spanned over 3,000 years. Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramids. That's a lot of history. It was also an insanely diverse place at many points in history, and still is today, with a population comprised of everyone from Africans to Macedonian Greeks. The reason I'm saying all of this is because this film, along with 1901's The Haunted Curiosity Shop, was one of the earliest Western horrors to feature Egyptian elements. It set a precedent for reducing and misrepresenting Egyptian culture, history, and people within the horror genre, something that would become a monster of its own in due time. Is it the most offensive depiction of Egypt I've ever seen? No. The problem is more what it represents, the beginning of a far greater problem. In this film, an Egyptian ruler employs a priest to revive his dead wife using magic. Unfortunately, things don't quite go to plan, with the priest spending most of his time making her skeleton dance and transforming it into a creature. When finally he returns flesh to her bones, she rejects the ruler and deanimates, while the priest flees. So there's not a lot to talk about with this film. It's very brief and quite shallow in terms of storytelling. And obviously, as I've said, nothing about it is accurate to Egyptian mythology or burial practices, and I'm not even really sure what the monster is meant to be. But all of that said, it still did make me laugh a little bit. I like the monster's funny little dance, and the way that the priest essentially scams the ruler, animating his wife's bones for but a moment before chucking them at him to escape. The ruler's reactions are also really funny, but I'm not sure if that part was intentional, or if the actor was just not very good at communicating his character's feelings. He has this weird non-reaction at first when the priest digs up his wife's bones and puts clothes on them. He's just kind of like, yeah, that's fine. I guess that can happen. It isn't until the monster has pranced around for a while that he's kind of like, actually, this is kind of bullshit. I don't like this. The special effects are pretty solid, too. Overall, this is nothing really to write home about, but it's fun for a couple minutes. I'm going to give the monster a 2 out of 5. I'd really recommend it mainly for Méliès completionists and fans of early slapstick. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I just want to say we recently passed 100 subscribers, and that is crazy to me. I know in YouTube terms that might not seem like much, but that's 105 people who are interested in what I thought was going to be a kind of niche topic on here. So, thank you so much. I just want to say how grateful I am. My next video is going to be another twofer featuring the French occult trick film The Infernal Cauldron and the French horror comedy trick film The Apparition or Mr. Jones' Comical Experience with a Ghost. You can find me on Blue Sky at Under the Fleapit, and if you like what I do and want to support me, my coffee donation page is linked in the description. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want, it would be very appreciated. And until next time, this has been Under the Fleapit. Stay spooky!